students. Now this is a question which has three parts. The question reads like this: describe the inguinal hernia. So this is an introduction of the inguinal hernia. Second part is gives differences between direct and indirect inguinal hernias. So we will mention about the differences which are there in the direct and the indirect hernias. And then in the last part, we will deal with the coverings of both the direct and the indirect hernias, okay, inguinal hernias. So this is a question which can be treated as a short question or a long question also. Let us come first to the first part of this question. Describe the inguinal hernia. And in this, let us come to this, that is the introduction. Hernia is an abnormal protrusion of abdominal contents. So this is the definition of hernia. And what is hernia? Hernia is an abnormal, not a normal. It is an abnormal protrusion. Protrusion means coming out of the abdominal cavity. So hernia is an abnormal protrusion of abdominal contents, and usually in the content either it is the omentum, the greater omentum, or it is the loop of the small intestine which protrude, okay, through the anterior abdominal wall, okay. And when it protrudes through the inguinal canal, which we have learned in the last video, then this protrusion of the abdominal content through the inguinal canal is called as the inguinal hernia. So what is inguinal hernia? Inguinal hernia is an abnormal protrusion of the abdominal contents through the inguinal canal, okay, intermuscular slit-like space which is located in the medial half of the inguinal ligament, above the inguinal ligament, almost half an inch above the inguinal ligament. Now these inguinal hernias, which are abnormal protrusion, they are of two different types, okay. It is classified as direct and indirect inguinal hernia. So let us see what is a direct inguinal hernia and what is an indirect inguinal hernia. If we see the indirect inguinal hernia, which is the most common type of the hernia, it is an abnormal, okay, protrusion of the contents of the abdomen, okay, abnormal protrusion of the contents of the abdominal contents through the deep inguinal ring. That means when the contents are pushed through the deep inguinal ring, and you know what is deep inguinal ring? This is the opening in the fascia transversalis, just lateral to the passage of the inferior epigastric artery, which we have learned in the last videos, okay. So it is an abnormal protrusion, or when the contents of the abdominal cavity, they come out through the deep inguinal ring and then they pass into the inguinal. So first they come out through the deep inguinal ring, which is an opening, okay, and then they pass through the inguinal canal, okay, and then they come out through the superficial inguinal ring, which is a slit-like opening in the aponeurosis of the external oblique abdominis. So when they come out through the superficial inguinal ring, and then they pass along with the spermatic cord into the scrotum, and this kind of protrusion, which may reach up to the bottom of the scrotum or may come out through the superficial inguinal ring only and stops there only, this kind of the protrusion of the in the inguinal canal is called as indirect inguinal hernia, okay. This is an indirect because the contents have to travel in the hernial sac throughout the course of the canal, inguinal canal. right from deep inguinal ring to the superficial inguinal ring, and further it may protrude into the scrotum by the side of the testes, and the spermatic cord going right up to the bottom of the scrotum. Okay, that kind of the hernia is called as indirect inguinal hernia. The second kind of the inguinal hernia is called as the direct inguinal hernia. And what is there in direct inguinal hernia? It is again the protrusion of the abdominal contents, abnormal protrusion of the abdominal content, where the abdominal contents are pushed through the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. That means the content, either it is omentum or it is the loop of small intestine or any other viscera, may be pushed through the posterior wall of the they don't come through the opening of the deep inguinal ring, but they push the posterior wall of the inguinal canal, and then they protrude in the inguinal canal and comes out through the superficial inguinal ring. Now this kind of the hernia, okay, which protrude directly from pushing the posterior abdominal wall, anterior abdominal wall, okay, they come out through an area which is bounded by a triangle called as the Hasselbalch triangle. Okay, this Hasselbalch or the inguinal triangle, okay, is pushed, and then the contents, they come out in the inguinal canal after pushing the posterior wall. They don't come through the deep inguinal ring. Okay, this kind of hernia, which is rare as compared to the indirect inguinal hernia, they are called as direct inguinal hernia. They are. So these are the two different kind of hernia, direct and the indirect inguinal hernia. So the indirect inguinal hernia, which was coming through the deep inguinal ring, was lying lateral to the inferior epigastric artery, which was forming the lateral boundary of the Hasselbalch triangle or the inguinal triangle. But the direct inguinal hernia, it comes out medial to this artery, that is the superficial inguinal ring. That is an important difference, okay, in relation to the inferior epigastric artery. Let us come to the third point of this question, okay, and it is necessary to understand these parts of the hernia. What are the parts of hernia? That means of the abnormal protrusion where it pushes the peritoneum, parietal peritoneum, because deep to the fascia transversalis lies the extraperitoneal tissue, which is mostly adipose tissue, and then lies the parietal peritoneum. This parietal peritoneum is pushed, okay, so the sac is formed by the parietal peritoneum, okay, it is pushed by it is pushed through the deep inguinal ring in case of indirect, and it is formed by the peritoneum. Let us see here what are the parts of the hernia or the sac of which is formed by the parietal peritoneum, deep to which lies the contents, okay, in the sac. Now it consists of a sac. The parts of hernia means it consists of a sac made up of peritoneum, as I have told you. The sac contains the abdominal viscera, okay. Within the sac lies the abdominal viscera, usually a coil of intestine. In the case of the inguinal hernia, it is usually a coil of intestine or omentum. Now the parts of this hernia are thus: there is a neck. Neck means from the deep, which lies at the deep inguinal ring, okay. This is the parietal peritoneum, okay, which has pushed and may contain the coils of a small intestine. So this is the peritoneum, and at the deep inguinal ring, okay, in fascia transversalis, there lies the neck of the hernia. It is the neck, the narrowest part, that means where it pushes its way into the deep inguinal ring. There the peritoneal sac, it has the neck. It is called as the neck. So first part is the neck, which lies in indirect at the deep inguinal ring. In the direct, it may be lying medial to the inferior epigastric artery in case, in the Hesselsbach triangle, and then here the neck is not narrow, it is quite wide. Okay, it is quite, because it is not coming through a small opening of the deep, but it is coming after pushing the posterior wall of the anterior abdomen. Okay, posterior wall. Now, so the first part is the neck, then comes the narrow part, then this narrow part, when it is traveling through the inguinal canal, it usually remains narrow, and then the terminal part of this is the called as the dilated body, or the, so the peritoneum, the parts of hernia are neck, narrow part of the sac, and then the dilated part of the sac, which is called as the body of the sac, where the loops of intestine, they are just coiled and lying. Okay, and it is a dilated part, because if from the narrow part and from the neck only one single loop of the intestine may come, which may get collected here in the terminal or the body part of the sac. So just remember that there is a neck, there is a narrow part, and there is a sac, especially in case of the indirect inguinal hernia, which is coming after traversing the whole course of the inguinal canal. I hope that you have understood till now. Let us come to the fourth aspect of the inguinal hernia, and this is the differences between direct and indirect hernias. Okay, so let us see the difference so we can understand what is a direct hernia and what is an indirect. In this column I have given the indirect inguinal hernia here and the direct inguinal hernia on this side. Now the first difference is that hernia occurs through the deep inguinal ring. As I said that the peritoneal sac or parietal peritoneum pushes its way in the deep inguinal ring, which lies in fascia transversalis. So the sac of peritoneum, along with it contains the loop of intestine, comes through the deep inguinal ring, which lies lateral to the inferior epigastric artery in the Hesselsbach triangle. If you remember the boundaries of Hesselsbach triangle. Now, on other hand, the direct inguinal hernia, it occurs by pushing the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. Just it pushes the posterior wall. And how the posterior wall is formed of the inguinal canal? In its medial two-third part, it is formed by the conjoined tendon, which is a strong tendon formed by the lowermost fibers of the internal oblique abdominis and the transversus abdominis. They go after arching over the inguinal canal to get inserted onto the pubic crest up to the pubic tubercle. Right from pubic symphysis up to the pubic tubercle, there is the attachment of this conjoined tendon, okay, which is formed by the lowest fibers of the two muscles, transversus abdominis and the internal oblique abdominis, right? So it pushes in the medial two-third part, it pushes that strong conjoined tendon, which is very rare, okay? Then there the medial the lateral one-third of the posterior wall of the this inguinal canal is formed by the fascia transversalis, okay, just medial to the inferior epigastric artery and the lateral to the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle. Try to remember that Hesselsbach triangle, okay. Let me draw this diagram if I can draw here. So I will draw, this is the rectus abdominis muscle, this is the pubic tubercle, pubic crest, and this is, say for example, the pubic symphysis is here. So this is the lateral margin of the rectus abdominis muscle, and then here is the inguinal ligament from anterior superior iliac spine to the pubic tubercle. This is the inguinal ligament. And then this inferior epigastric artery, it comes out through the external this iliac artery, and then from here it runs towards the umbilicus. Umbilicus is here. It runs towards. So this is that triangle. whose lateral boundary is formed by the inferior epigastric artery, and its medial boundary is formed by the lateral border of the rectus abdominis. The base is formed by the medial half of the inguinal ligament, and apex lies where the artery crosses the lateral border of this rectus. So this is that triangle, and itself it is divided into the two parts, okay, in its by the presence of this obliterated umbilical artery. Okay, it is an obliterated in adults. Okay, so this is the medial part and the lateral part of the Hassel's-Back triangle. Okay, in the medial part of the Hassel's-Back triangle, the direct inguinal hernia, the posterior wall of the inguinal canal is formed by this conjoint tendon. Okay, arching fibers, they are coming. But in the lateral part, this is the only fascia transversalis. That means between the obliterated umbilical artery and that of the inferior epigastric artery, this is only formed by the fascia transversalis, and the deep inguinal ring is lying here. So it may push the lateral part of the Hassel's-Back triangle, okay, or medial part. It is more common is the lateral direct inguinal hernia. Why? Because it is the fascia transversalis. So the peritoneal sac pushes the thin fascia transversalis, which just don't possess, give any resistance to this sac. But here is the conjoint tendon, which is quite strong and difficult to be pushed. Okay, so now you have understood the posterior wall of the inguinal canal through which the direct inguinal hernia can take place. Okay, let us come to the second difference between it. Occurs through the persistent processus vaginalis. And what is processus vaginalis? It is a tubular structure formed by the peritoneum, which is attached at the bottom of the scrotum, okay, and it brings along with the testes. Okay, so this processus vaginalis is a tubular structure of the peritoneum. Once the testis comes to the scrotum, this gets atrophied, and there is only a fibrous remnant remain, which I will show you in the next diagram. Okay, I'm in the next page. So that is, it occurs through, and if this tubular structure of the peritoneum, which is the processus vaginalis, if it persists in the afterbirth, then it is an open communication, and through this processus vaginalis communication, the loop of intestine can very easily pass. Okay, so this is the region for the indirect inguinal hernia, which is occurring through the inguinal canal. Okay, thus the indirect hernia occurs in a young person because there is no obliteration of this processus vaginalis, and the peritoneal cavity becomes continuous through this processus vaginalis right up to the upper pole of the testis. Okay, and in this comes the loop of the intestine. Okay, but on other hand, the direct hernia is due to the, not because of the persistent of process vaginalis, because processus vaginalis is coming through the deep inguinal ring. Okay, but here, since it is occurring by the onto the medial side, okay, on medial through the Hassel's-Back triangle, through the pushing the posterior wall of the inguinal canal, okay, this occurs naturally if the posterior wall become weak. That means muscles, muscles like the transversus abdominis, internal oblique abdominis, if it become weak, as it is in case of the old age, okay, then this can be pushed by the contents of the abdominal cavity. So the peritoneum sac pushes this along with the loop of intestine. So this is the direct inguinal. So if the muscle weakness usually is seen in the old age, thus the direct inguinal hernia occurs in the old age, while the this indirect occurs in the young age, in a child. Okay. Now the third difference is the sac is directed downwards, forwards and medially. This is the same direction as it is the direction of the inguinal canal. from deep inguinal ring to the superficial inguinal ring. So it takes the same direction, that is the sake, peritoneal sake. It pushes it ways, okay, downwards, forwards and medially, and then comes out through superficial inguinal ring, and then it goes towards the scrotum. Now in the direct inguinal hernia, it just directly pushes the things forward, that is the posterior wall is pushed only forward, okay, and then it comes out through the superficial inguinal ring. Now the fourth difference between direct and indirect is that neck of the hernia lies just lateral to the inferior epigastric artery. Let us see this diagram, okay? And in this diagram, we see that this is an indirect inguinal hernia as we have seen here, and this is the diagram for the direct inguinal hernia. I will just simplify it, okay? Now, let us see the orientation of this diagram. This is the peritoneum, what is called as the, where I am just tracing my tip of the this pencil, okay. This is the peritoneum, that means parietal peritoneum, and this parietal peritoneum pushes its way through the deep inguinal ring. And how the deep inguinal ring is formed here? It is formed by the internal spermatic fascia. So this is the internal, this membrane here which covers the testis, spermatic cord, and then goes. So in between these two is the deep inguinal ring, and then this sac pushes its way through the deep inguinal ring. But then this deep inguinal ring lies just lateral to this inferior epigastric artery. See this inferior epigastric artery? Outside the peritoneum, this yellow color which I have put here is nothing but the extraperitoneal tissues, okay, means usually the adipose tissues, okay, extraperitoneal tissues, and this is the testis, okay, which is covered by the this internal spermatic fascia, which is continuation of the fascia transversalis. This is fascia because the gap in the fascia transversalis is the deep inguinal ring, and then it continues, okay, while covering to the testes, okay, and the sperma. This card-like structure which I have drawn here coming from superior pole of the testis is nothing but the spermatic, I mean not spermatic, it is ductus deferens or the vas deferens, okay. So this is how the peritoneal sac pushes its way through the deep inguinal ring which lies lateral to the inferior epigastric arteries, okay. So that's why it is said that this neck of the hernia lies just lateral to the inferior epigastric artery. Let us see in this diagram, which is the diagram of direct. Now this inferior epigastric artery was here and the hernial sac was lateral to it. Now this inferior epigastric artery is here and this is the deep inguinal ring. Through this is the vas deferens is passing, which is going right up to the testes. From the margin of this deep inguinal ring, the fascia transversalis is giving the internal spermatic fascia, which is covering to the contents of the spermatic cord. One of this is shown as the ductus deferens and others are the testes. It covers the testes, okay. And here is the inferior epigastric artery because this deep inguinal ring lies just lateral to the inferior epigastric artery. Now this direct inguinal hernia is also due to the pushing of the posterior wall of the inguinal canal, which is formed here by the, I mean to say, this is the fascia transversalis, and more laterally it is formed by the more medially, okay, medial 2/3 it is conjoined tendon and lateral 1/3 it is the fascia transversalis. Now this peritoneum is pushing its way here, okay, pushing the fascia transversalis, then it will push the cremasteric muscle and its fascia, and then it will push here the external spermatic fascia. This is external and will come out. So this protrusion of the peritoneal sac is directly from the posterior wall of the inguinal canal, and this is pushing the contents, okay, I mean say the layers of, that is the internal the fascia transversalis first it has push, then it will push the cremasteric muscle and its fascia, and then it will push here deep inside. Okay, it will be covered by the external spermatic fascia. Now this is the lateral direct inguinal hernia. Lateral, that means through the fascia, pushing the fascia trans. If it would have been the indirect direct, I mean say not indirect, I'm sorry, the medial direct inguinal hernia, then it will push this conjoined tendon and then will come out. Okay, here, right. So this is a direct inguinal hernia and this is indirect. Just you have to see that this is the sac is formed just medial to the inferior epigastric artery, and here the sac is formed just lateral to the inferior epigastric artery. That is the difference. Okay. Now the last difference which I have mentioned here is the obstruction is common at the neck. So these loops of intestine may get obstructed because here the neck is very narrow. Okay, as we have seen in this diagram. Okay, this was the peritoneal sac, and here at the neck it is narrow. So intestinal loop which are protruding through this peritoneal sac at the neck is the narrowest part where they may get obstructed or strangulated, okay, twisted, and that is an emergency condition. Lot of pain will be there, and the loop of intestine may have the cut in the blood supply and may die. Okay, so that is an emergency condition in the hernia. Okay, so neck is may show the obstruction because it is quite narrow. Okay, it is neck is quite narrow, which lies lateral to the inferior epigastric artery because it is pushing its way through the deep inguinal ring, and deep inguinal ring is quite narrow. Now, in case of the direct inguinal hernia, the neck of the hernial sac, okay, this is the hernial sac, this was the hernial sac. Now the neck of the hernial sac is quite wide, okay, because it is not coming through the deep inguinal ring, which was a narrow space. It is just pushing the posterior wall, okay, the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. So this peritoneal sac is pushing the contents, I would say the posterior, which is lateral side is fascia transversalis, on medial side is the conjoint tendon, okay, conjoint tendon, and then it will come through the superficial inguinal ring, okay, superficial inguinal. So this was the major differences between a direct and between an indirect and the direct inguinal hernia. Now we come to the last part of this question, and this is that what are the coverings of direct and what are the coverings of the indirect hernia. Since indirect hernia is coming through the inguinal canal, it will have all the same covering as it is the testis and spermatic cord was having. Okay, that is just easy to remember, is that indirect inguinal hernia which is coming through inguinal canal, deep inguinal ring, will carry all the covering as the testis and spermatic cord are carrying. Okay, carrying. So there is not much difference in the covering of indirect inguinal hernia and that of the spermatic cord. Okay, but on other hand, the coverings of the direct inguinal hernia will be little different depending on whether that direct inguinal hernia is pushing its way through the fascia transversalis, that means the lateral part of the Hasselbeck triangle, which is more common, or it is pushing its way through the conjoint tendon, okay, conjoint tendon, which is quite rare, Let us come first to the direct covering of the direct inguinal hernia, and I will just explain you this diagram, okay. This is the peritoneum in the violet color which I have drawn is the peritoneum, and then in the yellow color outside this peritoneum is the extraperitoneal fatty tissue or extraperitoneal tissues, okay, in yellow. And then deep to the peritoneum, this is the fascia transversalis, okay, and this is the opening in the fascia transversalis, that is the deep inguinal ring. And then from the margin of the deep inguinal ring, the fascia transversalis sends the fascia in the form of a sleeve around the spermatic cord and the testes, and this is called as internal spermatic fascia, which we have already learned in the inguinal canal and spermatic cord also, okay, covering of the spermatic cord. So this is the deepest fascia covering to the testis and spermatic cord is the internal spermatic fascia, okay. Then it will have the covering what is called as the cremasteric muscle and its fascia, and then we'll have the covering of the external spermatic fascia, which is nothing but the continuation from the superficial inguinal ring through the aponeurosis, external oblique abdominis aponeurosis, and it is the external spermatic fascia, and outermost it is the skin and the dartos muscle. This is the structures which will be covering also to this, I mean to say, to the testis and spermatic cord in the scrotum. But this direct inguinal hernia doesn't, occur through this deep inguinal ring or in the fascia transversalis, okay, opening in the fascia transversalis, but it occurs just medial to the inferior epigastric artery, and because of that, first it pushes the peritoneum. This was the parietal peritoneum. First it pushes the parietal peritoneum, okay, and thus the parietal peritoneum forms the sac of the hernia, okay, and outside the first covering, that's why in the direct inguinal hernia, outside the sac of the parietal peritoneum, hernial sac as it is now called, is the extra peritoneal tissue shown in the yellow color here. Extra, you may just little zoom it, okay, I will just zoom it. Okay, in this diagram you can see that this is the yellow color is the extra. So first covering is the of the sac, okay, which is of the direct, okay, which is occurring through the Hasselsbach triangle, and in this diagram through the lateral part of the Hasselsbach triangle or the inguinal triangle, pushing the this fascia, that is the fascia transversalis, okay. So this blue color line is nothing but the fascia transversalis. See this blue? This violet color line was parietal peritoneum, then yellow extra peritoneal fat, and then it will push the fascia transversalis, which forms the posterior wall, okay, of the inguinal canal. So it will push the posterior wall, fascia transversalis, and in front of the fascia transversalis at this label will lie the cremasteric muscle and its fascia. I call it as cremasteric muscle because there are loops of the cremasteric muscle in between the fascia. So I call it as cremasteric muscle and its fascia. Most of the book may describe it as cremasteric fascia only, okay, cremasteric fascia. So the second covering will be the cremasteric fascia, which is also covering to the testes. It will also cover to the sac of the hernia. Then the third covering is the same, that is the external spermatic fascia. So this is the external spermatic fascia, which is nothing but it is from the margin of the superficial inguinal ring, from the aponeurosis of the external oblique abdominis, this fascia begins, okay. So this is the aponeurosis of the external oblique abdominis, and this is its fascia. Here will be also the aponeurosis of external oblique. So the outermost covering is the external spermatic fascia, and then will come the skin and the dartos muscle. These are the coverings of the direct inguinal hernia, okay, direct, which takes place medial to the inferior epigastric artery by pushing its way through the posterior wall. So this is the sac which is pushing its way through the posterior wall in the lateral part, first pushing the fascia, and in the medial part this may also occur, which is very rare. Here it will push its way through the internal spermatic fascia transversalis here, then to the conjoined tendon, and then through the superficial inguinal ring it will come out. We are not going, it's quite rare, we are not going to this, to say the medial part of the direct inguinal hernia. I have just shown you this diagram it is from the lateral part, okay, occurring through the direct inguinal hernia. So you should understand these coverings of the lateral part of the inguinal hernia, okay, direct inguinal hernia. Extraperitoneal tissue, fascia transversalis, cremastic muscle and its fascia, external spermatic fascia, and skin and the dartos muscle. Dartos muscle, if it is going deep, okay, to the scrotum, then it will be dart. Otherwise, it will be only the skin, okay. If it remains near the superficial inguinal ring, it will only, because dartos muscle, they are near the bottom of the scrotum, right? Now let us come to the coverings of the indirect here, coverings of the indirect inguinal hernia. And let us see the coverings of the indirect inguinal hernia. First, the orientation. Let us see the indirect means which is occurring through the deep inguinal ring, okay, which lies lateral to the inferior epigastric artery. This is inferior and lateral. Again in the violet color, this is the parietal peritoneum, and this parietal peritoneum along its contents, that is the loop of intestine, is pushing its way through the deep inguinal ring, okay. It is pushing its way through the opening, okay, deep inguinal ring, and this hernial sac is then it will go into the, along with the spermatic cord, it will go towards testis in the scrotum, this sac. Okay, it is just the beginning. It is lying just deep to the, I will say very close to that of the superficial inguinal ring, and then it will come here right up to the testis, and then may go further here by pushing by the side up to the bottom of the scrotum here. Okay, so this is the first covering, will be again the same, extraperitoneal fatty tissue, which lies outside this parietal peritoneum. This is the extraperitoneum. I am trying to draw it in yellow color, which you may see with little difficulty. So this is the extraperitoneal tissue, as it was also in case of the direct. So first is outside the peritoneal sac, okay, peritoneal sac, in which the loop of intestine is there. Then will come the covering of the internal spermatic fascia, which is covering to testes also. This is, and from where the internal spermatic fascia has come, this line, from where it has come? It has come from the fascia transversalis. This is fascia transversalis. See, and this is the margin of the, I would say, internal inguinal ring. And then from margin, this is the internal spermatic fascia. Then outside this will be the cremastic muscle and its fascia. Okay, these are the muscle bands. Okay, loops which I have drawn of cremastic muscle, which are derived from the lowermost fibers of the internal oblique muscle. And then in between is the fascia. So it is called as cremastic muscle and fascia. Okay, then will be outside this will be the external spermatic fascia. And this external spermatic fascia is nothing but coming from the aponeurosis of the external oblique abdominis. This is external oblique abdominis muscle. This is internal oblique abdominis. Okay, from where the cremastic muscle and its fascia were derived. And if you will trace this medially, this will form the conjoined tendon. Okay, because it is ultimately the tendon of insertion of the internal oblique and the transversalis abdominis. So conjoined tendon is continuous on this side, and here are the lower fibers of the internal oblique. Okay, just it is a diagrammatic representation. And then from the internal, I mean say external abdominis, the aponeurosis will give this fascia, and that is the external spermatic fascia. Then after this external spermatic fascia, the outermost covering is the skin, and deep to the skin lies the dartos muscle, which are not a continuous sheet, okay, maybe having patches, or sometime it is also a continuous sheet. So let me draw something like a continuous sheet of the dartos muscle. So this may be the dartos muscle, okay. Sometime patchy, sometime continuous. Okay, in upper part it is patchy, while in the bottom it is a continuous sheet. So this is the dartos muscle I have drawn, and then finally it is lying deep to the skin because it is a dartos is a subcutaneous muscle. Okay, so this is the skin. Then will come the skin. So these are the coverings of the indirect inguinal hernia. So they are same as that of the testis and the spermatic cord, because testis also descend through the inguinal canal on the whole course of the inguinal. So this sac of the hernia is also descending through the deep inguinal ring. So it will also have the same covering. It will also, note down this, external is peritoneal tissue, extraperitoneal tissue, internal spermatic fascia, cremasteric muscle and its fascia, external spermatic fascia, dartos muscle, and lastly it is the skin. This completes the a question on the inguinal hernia, difference between direct and indirect inguinal hernia, and the coverings of direct and the indirect inguinal hernia. Okay, I hope that you must have understood at least what I have said about 50 to 70%. Read your books. Again, see the diagrams which I have drawn here. Okay, and then you just prepare your question. It is an important question. Inguinal hernia and differences and coverings are an important question. Thank you very much for watching this video.